The next job is to fit the gear change mechanism. This has all been cleaned in petrol and got rid of all the gritty, notchy feelingness out of it. So effectively very clean. Here's an example where your notes make sense. At the time it seemed like a lot of work, but I just happened to note which was the shorter bolt and which was the longer bolt, so that when it comes to reassembly it makes my life a lot easier. Okay, so first thing in is a spring, which I'm trying to remember the orientation. It goes that way. Put a blob of oil around that. Then we have the tensioner itself. I'm going to put some oil on that. Try to drop it in the case, that would be embarrassing. And that hooks, spring hooks I should say, onto that. And that's the shorter of the bolts on this one. Now what I should have done is check the torque settings. I'll torque that up properly in a minute. I've just got it nipped down. We have the pin, the locating pin, and I don't want to drop this in the case, which is why I'm using the magnet. And that goes into the drum. We have the what do you call this? The selector cam, maybe? I'm sure it's got a name. But I've got to somehow pull this pulley back and get that into place and drop the bolt all in at the same time. This is going to be fun. It'll either go really, really well or really, really badly. What am I going to use? I'm going to use the end of my socket to apply tension to the roller. Hold that out of the way. Then I'm going to try and locate that. If I knew where the hole was. Right, that's now in the hole. Now all I've got to do is do this up. So far it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Okay, both these bolts, according to the manual, work out at 10 Newton meters. I think to most people, if you haven't got a torque wrench, that's just sort of tight. It's not a lot of force. Next in is the gear selector rod, which passes through the case. I think it's at this point I have to put the engine back up on blocks, because without the blocks it won't pass right through. It's time for the run through of the gears, and I have just been through them and they do work, but it's very difficult to do without all the gubbins in. Effectively I've got to turn the lay shaft, which in turn turns the final drive shaft at this side, but without putting drag on both of them to simulate the effect of like pulling a chain and the engine running through this. It's very difficult to select the gears at the same time. I'll run through them now. So we're currently in neutral with nothing happening at the final drive. Nice and smooth. I have to, the other part is that I have to apply a bit of pressure to the selector rod as well to stop it disengaging from the mechanism. So it's all a bit tricky. So it should be down for 1. That should be first gear, and we've got first gear, and that is turning the final drive. and then it's up for second. This is where the drag has to be applied. Nope, it's not working. Come on. Come on. Great. Okay, first gear, select for second, second gear engaged, third gear engaged, fourth gear engaged, fifth gear engaged, fourth gear engaged, third gear engaged, second gear engaged, down to first. Nope, that's neutral. First gear engaged. Oh, we popped out. There we go, and back to neutral. Now that I know that the gear selector is working as it should do, I feel confident that I can now torque up the screws around the edge of the crankcase halves. I've taken the torque up to 8 Newton meters, which is the lowest setting recommended. I'm just paranoid when it comes to torque wrenches. I have had issues in the past with badly calibrated torque wrenches, so that is as much pressure as I want to put on those screws. If we have a leak along the case at any point during operation, then they can obviously be upped slightly. They're all accessible from with it when it's in the bike. So, but that is to spec, but just on the lowest setting. Brand new O-ring onto a seat of oil. The pump itself, I've already primed with oil as well, so I don't want it starting up dry. I mean, most of this will drain out, but at least we know it's got some lubricant in there. There's only two ways of doing this: this way or facing the other way, and it isn't going to be facing the other way, so it has to be this way. It'd be embarrassing to get that wrong. More cleaning. The clutch plates definitely need cleaning because they're actually, well, I've managed to separate one already, but they are quite firmly stuck together and they are bonded to the metal plates as well, so I suspect they haven't actually moved from one another for a long time. So they're going to get good clean, re-oiled, and then it'll be time to assemble them back in the bike. Right, freshly cleaned clutch pack. It is now rotating within itself. Before it was absolutely welded solid, where it sat for 40 years. And I'm just throwing this on here right now before I've even checked the hardware to make sure there isn't a thrust washer underneath this. Do this. If I miss it, there we go. Just need a wiggle. Down she goes. Excellent. Excellent. Come on, you. Right, underneath this clutch pack there should be a washer, which I have here. Now the fun game of fit the circlip. So fully engaged. Yep, that's him. 4 springs. And bearing carrier. 4 bolts, 4 washers. Try not to drop the washers in there. Okay, I can't torque these down until I have the pinion in place so that I can jam up the drivetrain. Next, the cleaned up bearing. I'll add oil now so it's not dry. And lastly, the clutch actuator. Good luck. And the first piece that goes on is this pinion, and when I dismantled it I used this nick here as a witness mark so this was facing down, so that's going to be the first item that goes on here. So that's on. The next part to go on is the actual centrifugal oil filter itself, which again I'm just going to put a bit of oil on the splines. Anyway, I have cleaned this of all the sludge that was in it and removed the gasket that was on there. Next we have the washer, and it's got an outer face which is facing outwards now, and then lastly we've got the funky nut, which is this one here, and I know which way up this goes because I slightly gnarled it up. I have since cleaned it a bit. Okay, it's time to torque up the castle nut thing in there using this adapter, and here's the definition of slightly sketchy. So the only thing I've got long enough to engage with that 1/2 inch drive is this impact driver adapter. So in order to fit that onto something I need this socket, which I think is about 8mm or something daft, and then I've got an adapter to step that up to 1/2 inch so I can finally fit the torque wrench on it. Okay, in the end I opted to ask Caroline to give me a hand with holding the unit still while I torqued this up. It did work, although at one point I did shear off the end of my impact driver adapter, but other than that it worked. The next bit is fitting of the cap for the centrifugal oil filter. I've cleaned all the gasket surfaces off. So it's a case of just screwing that back down onto its place. I've got a gasket out the gasket set. Hopefully this one fits. I thought I had ordered a replacement screw because I had to cut one in order to get it off with the impact driver. Turns out I completely didn't do that. So I'm having to reuse that gnarly screw, but I will put a blob of thread lock on it, just a smidge to hold it in place. I was moaning the other day about gasket, aftermarket gaskets, and this one's just a little bit oversized. Problem is, if they're tight they will want to fold and not form a proper seal, which is what it's doing now. So I don't know if you can see this, but the gasket fits in there, and as I chase it round you get this sort of ridge build up in it, so I'm not quite sure what to do about that. I'm going to bring you back. Okay, once again, just to rant about the bullshit of aftermarket parts. I have literally had to go around the outside of this and trim off minute amounts of material just to shrink it down enough to get in the actual housing itself. So again, if whatever you're doing, spend the extra money if you can get them on genuine gaskets, because the aftermarket ones are generally rubbish.